Okay, well, it's great to be here, and let me give you a little background on why I'm doing this presentation. And it really has to do with, not to put any pressure on last year's WLPC presenters, but I noticed that after a lot of the presentations, I came away knowing that there was a lot of valuable content in those presentations, but I wasn't quite sure exactly what I was supposed to take away from it. So I thought, wow, you know, it would be great if this year Keith could talk to these presenters ahead of time and say, hey, listen, when you present, you know, tell them what you're going to tell them, you know, teach them that, and then tell them what you taught them. You know, I just said, okay, just do that. And he's like, well, why don't you just do a presentation on presenting? And I thought, oh, hey, why not? So I'm here, and I think this will really be incredibly valuable for you, for all of you, because just listening to the presentations today, and I was out yesterday, unfortunately, I could see that there's a lot of communications that's going on when you're doing, let's say, the site surveys, or you're interacting and explaining to customers exactly what they need, or even internally when you're working at an enterprise and you're talking to your management what exactly they need to do in order for something to work the way they expect it to work. You need to be able to communicate that clearly. One thing I recommend is that maybe next year, a number of you in the audience that don't think of yourselves as presenters, give a TED Talk. You know, it'll put you on your toes. What I read, I did a lot of research actually when I did my little 10-minute talk here. I read a couple of books, and there's some interesting things that I found out, like the sensation of fear and the sensation of excitement, you know, physiologically are identical, right? So it's how you look at the experience. You know, am I scared of being up here, or am I excited to be up here? You know, those are tricks that you can use to kind of get over that fear. Now, the slide I have up here is really something about rhythm, and I'll be talking about things like rhythm and order, and this is sort of like a little music, you know, a number of notes in a music, in a song, I guess. And you'll see that there's structure to that, and it makes the presentation interesting and proceeds in an ordered way. Many of you on Twitter or online may have seen this presentation. I think the core thing I want you to come away here for today is a lot of you have a lot of dots, right? And the more experience you have, the more connected dots you have. And so here, I'm going to be throwing out a number of things that will really help you present, not even publicly, but also internally to your companies. It'd be extremely valuable for you. And I'm hoping the way I present these points, they'll stick, you know, and they'll be memorable. Now this here, I guess you can imagine what this picture is showing you. Some of the thoughts that come to mind, first of all, I have a number of different reactions to this. One thing, it reminds me of a bunch of pop-ups when you go to a website and you're overwhelmed. I'm like, oh my God. Another thing is I actually get a little tight in my chest because I'm like, oh my God, there's too much going on here. And then other thoughts are, wow, there's so much information. What am I supposed to look at? And it looks like everybody's competing for your attention. And in the act of doing so, there's no attention, right? Or you know, a familiar term we use is signal to noise, right? It's a disaster. That's a disaster, right? But unfortunately, a lot of presentations, when people go into them, they just throw everything in that presentation, and they hope something sticks. And reality is nothing sticks. It's too much. It's too much. So let's go to the next slide. Now what do you feel? You can breathe, like an exhale, right? So you don't have that, and you can focus. You can say, oh, look, you know, I see two little lily pads and a lotus flower. I'm assuming that's a lotus flower. So it's a nice, serene environment. It's easy for you to understand. It's easy for you to kind of grasp what I'm showing you. And so that's you'll see as I go along, you know, there's a lot behind that. Now think of something, let's say, very memorable to you, like when you first fell in love. You know, love is one of those exciting emotions. And you're deeply in love, and you decided to write a love letter, right? And so you put all your heart and your soul into this love letter, explaining and expressing yourself. And then, unfortunately, what people do, using the analogy of a love letter versus a presentation, is this is how they address the love letter, okay? Think about that and let that one stick, because when you present, and that's really a personal conveyance of information from yourself to, you know, the parties out in the audience, you know, you need to make it addressed to them specifically. Knowing your audience is absolutely critical, and so every time you present, think of the love letter and think of addressing it to the audience and not to whom it may concern. And that one stuck with me. Now this is also, it's a fact, and you'll see that there's different ways of, when you present, different ways of making an argument. This one is one way. And basically 86% of the executives out there that were interviewed for this, on this topic said that communication was extremely critical to their job, to the success of their job, and to how much money they make. Yet they only invested, only like 25% invested more than 2 hours into preparing for a presentation. Presenting it's not easy, right? But I think it's worth it. And one of the things that helps, of course, is properly preparing yourself. I'm doing this pretty much ad hoc. I read a lot of the books, and I put a lot of effort into trying to understand the topic. And it makes it a lot easier to present. It's a lot harder for me to present off of bullet points, believe it or not. So, it is an important topic. Now, another big thing I want you to remember is when you present, what is the core point you're presenting about? Please, please, please wipe out that slide with all that stuff and all the details. Clarify that, and just narrow it down to what is your core point. What are you trying to get across? Okay, that's super critical. Now, you really want this to be you. You want to be able to stand out. I've been on the vendor side for like 18 years, and you can imagine customers are exposed to vendor after vendor after vendor. Why is your pitch any different? And again, it's really important that you know your audience. You got to know what they're looking for from you. What are their expectations? Another important thing that I think will hopefully be memorable for you is that how many people are in this room? Like a couple hundred? And I'm only doing a 10-minute talk, but I got a couple hundred people focused on me for 10 minutes. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of time. They're expecting to get something out of your presentation. So again, take that to heart and invest the time and the effort into to learning the topic. And also, they're there. I mean, you're here. I'm here for you. I'm not here for me. So. Now, this is really how I'd like people to view the act of presenting. It's a personal experience, right? One of the things that I think of is like a documentary. And today, we're dealing with a lot of lower level subjects. So, it tends to be a lot of bullet points. And really, there's not a lot of different ways of presenting that information. But each of us has a unique way of presenting the facts. And one of the things on one of the books I read about talked about documentaries. I mean, when you think about it, documentaries sort of sound boring, right? It's just documenting some facts and history. But there's so many different ways of making documentaries exciting, interesting, and that's really what you add. Everybody has their unique experiences. Like I said, I was on the vendor side, and I grew up with computers, but and had different experiences, and so each of us has that to offer, and so that's really what makes your presentation unique. Oops. Okay, this is critical. Now, I was thinking about this slide, and it talks about the left brain and the right brain, right? And so, on the left side, the left brain, I think about a lot of us, right? And then the thought that came to my head, because Eddie knows I like to watch cat videos, is a lot of us are really focused on our left brain, and I think of a little cat like kneading, getting ready to take a nice little nap on the left side of the brain. We need to kind of get out of that, okay? When we're dealing a lot with business people, we need to kind of engage all of it, the whole of the brain, the emotional part, and look at the difference. You can see the difference, and so that's one thing to really focus on is making sure that your presentation is memorable because of the emotion. And then I thought about some of the not even recent movies, but like the recent movie like Guardians of the Galaxy. What makes it memorable was because the interactions between the characters, like Star Wars, the interactions between the characters. A lot of the non-memorable movies with a lot of CGI tend to not be memorable because there's no emotion. It's just kind of there, and it gets boring after a while. So when you present, excuse me, you're going to come up with a number of core points. You got your core point, right? And then you're going to have subpoints. You may have subpoints under that core point. And then you're going to have arguments. Arguments are basically your way of defending those points to the audience. And there's different ways of doing that. You can have a logical way of doing it, which is just the facts. That's really the least powerful of all three ways. Then you can have a way of doing it. In this case, it's called ethos, and I had to put the pronunciation because it's Latin. But basically, ethical appeal is really having someone like that quote. I was using a third party to say that 86% of the executives only invest 2 hours in something. And then you can have an emotional appeal, which is really, I think that is the most powerful way of doing it. Really reaching into each person's understanding at a deeper level and having it stick. So those are really some points to focus on. And finally, everybody has, like I said, everybody has their own music, their own way of doing things. think about doing a TED Talk next year, and think about, you know, you learn a lot, trust me. I read a couple of books, a topic I would really never have thought about reading about, but there is a lot to presenting properly, and the more you do it, the more you learn. So thank you.